Hi, I'm SJ.
And I'm Pegsy. Welcome to our Heels in the Hierarchy podcast, where we discuss the experiences and challenges faced by working women today. Join us as we explore a range of topics from navigating career advancement to balancing work and personal life. So step into an episode of Heels in the Hierarchy, the place where we explore current challenges and opportunities and share extraordinary insights for ordinary women, one conversation at a time. So our topic for today's podcast is the importance of emotional intelligence in the workplace. I know it's something that we're both very passionate about. One of the things I would acknowledge is that I have an awareness of what emotional intelligence is, but I wonder if it's completely accurate. So, SJ, how would you describe emotional intelligence?
I think emotional intelligence is, for me, the ability to have the self-awareness around the world around you and how that interacts and how your behaviour, your language, your whole self is presented. So a lot of the conflicts that I've come across is around people's misconceptions around emotional intelligence. So they're reacting to the world around them rather than being self-aware of their behaviours and their interactions with others. So when you've got emotional intelligence, you're aware of what your actions and what you're saying is impacting the other person. You have an awareness of that. So if you're having a difficult conversation with somebody, you're not only being aware of what you're saying and how it's said, it's the tone, the manner in which you do it, but you also understand where it's coming from and how that may land with somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore you're already preconceiving what their reactions may be, and you're able to have the awareness of how that's going to go. Whereas if you don't have emotional intelligence, you're reacting to the world from your perspective and your right to feel a thing. And that's where conflict can come.
Okay.
Because you're not thinking about the impact or the way it's coming across. You're just thinking about yourself.
And this then also ties into another concept that is quite widely spoken about at the moment, which is psychological safety.
Mm.
How could you help us to understand psychological safety as a concept?
I think sometimes language gets in the way, doesn't it? About, I think everyone can feel whether they are in a workplace or an environment that they feel they can be fully themselves and be accepted, rather than an environment where they feel they can't really be heard. They can't say what they need to say. They feel that there's a tension or a sense of not feeling safe. And that's when it's psychological safety. If you've got a team that feel that their voice is listened to, it may not be that always is taken on board and everyone's got something to say and it's been able to be heard by somebody that's not going to take offence to everything and it doesn't matter, it's not going to be dictated to, then people get to play and engage. I think if you're feeling psychological safe, you are able to bring your ideas to the table, you're able to be creative, you are able to feel that you may need to have feedback to somebody and have a difficult conversation, but that doesn't mean that is a personal attack.
Mm-hmm. A great description that I heard of psychological safety was about it being a little bit like the weather, that it's variable, that it changes, that it's different in one location to another. And so if you think of it like the weather, it can be different day to day, but also person to person and context to context. And it really resonated with me in creating the perception of psychological safety. And what your description of emotional intelligence was as an enabler for teams and individuals to feel psychologically safe is that it's not just about, I have created this culture where everyone is always psychologically safe at all times. Emotional intelligence is recognizing that aspect of it being like the weather, where sometimes how you present as a leader, how other people are as individuals, that's the crux of emotional intelligence, which when you position that rightly and you role model it, then the byproduct is good psychological safety.
I love the way you're able to conceptualize things that I talk about. That's definitely one of your biggest strengths. And that's absolutely what I'm saying. I think what's really interesting is that you can always point out those areas where there aren't psychological safety, or those teams or the cultures, because you've got high turnover.
Yeah.
You've got, not just high turnover, but you just don't have very good productivity or team dynamics. There's bickering and power dynamics, and just not very general sense of feeling happy in an environment, which is why people just don't want to do it. It could be that, and I imagine in your HR perspective, that's sometimes a lot of what people have to deal with. It's not necessarily the role or the job, it's how people are feeling.
Yeah.
And impact us where someone's feeling. And I think sometimes we talked about skill setting and teaching in other podcasts, but I feel like sometimes on a leadership management course, or however you want to call it, it's not just about the HR and things. I think people, if they were bold enough to be able to really have moments of going, how self-aware are you about how you hold yourself? How are you able to take feedback that isn't easy to hear? Are you able to control your own emotions enough to have a perception that it's not all about you?
Yes.
And that your team members, they come from their own perspective.
Yeah.
Whether it's right or wrong, whether it's fact or opinion, it doesn't matter. Your expectation is to be able to sit in that room and try to understand and be aware of all the dynamics that's going on. That is something that I feel isn't being done well, where otherwise you would have all these issues, that's going in, because people are, in my perspective, have been promoted out of experience and skill setting on a role, not on the interactions of actually how can they manage people. And it doesn't matter what job you do, the human behaviour is a human complex human behaviour, and how I was brought up and my perception of the world and what I think is right and wrong is different to yours.
Yeah.
And that is for everybody. And if we don't have the emotional intelligence or the curiosity, I think that's another thing around asking the right questions of where that comes from. Or I'm curious you said that. We can easily become quite dictatorial. This is the way I've said it. Like strong parenting. We go, this is what we said. Like it or lump, it's my house.
Yeah.
And that's where conflict can happen.
Yeah. I think that's interesting as well, because we've talked a lot about how we've interacted with different managers and some managers' perception of what strong management is. I think it is slowly changing, but I think there is a macho model of what leadership is and management is, a preference for masculine traits. And, we've talked in the past about the pink and fluffy stuff. And I've used that expression myself when I've talked about what organisational development is. But I realised that I was doing it a disservice, because there are hard-nosed, there's reporting, there's evidence, there's statistics, there's all sorts of research that actually emotional intelligence is not, it's a soft skill, but it's not about being soft. It's not about being overly supportive or perceived support of people to the detriment of achieving organisational or team goals or professional development. It's about balancing one's emotions and logic in how you interact with people, whether you lead people in a capital L leadership role, or whether you're working alongside people or in rapidly set up and dismantled teams.
I mean, it reminds me of being brought in to change the whole narrative around the world of resilience, right? So I kind of banned it where I was working to say, look, it's not that resilience is not so important. It's not the fact, but it was sold in such a way to be pushing down employees' throats that they weren't strong enough, they weren't able to bounce back. The language was so wrong that actually, instead of encouraging, empowering people to own that they are resilient, they need to kind of self-care, they need time to reflect. It became, let me teach you how to become resilient. And what was actually received was, you're telling me I'm not enough. You're telling me that I'm not doing enough. You're telling me that you're teaching me that I'm not enough. So actually it was really wrong. And I said, the approach was so clinically, medically wrong and bringing such bad. I was like, we need to shift this. So we changed the whole teaching to be about emotional intelligence, because actually what they're missing is about the conflict that was happening with teams.
Mm.
And that's about being a bit more courageous and being able to go, the emotional intelligence is, and importance of being able to help people understand that they are all coming from a different perspective. It doesn't matter if you're in a workplace or not. Acknowledging that we're all different and unique, and the way our training is, I've got a whole realm of an amazing therapist, but we're either different modalities. In people that we have the same modality, we still think differently. We still perceive the world differently and the world around us.
Yeah.
Our upbringing has shaped us to be, and our experiences have shaped us to be a certain way. And so if we're expecting to do everything with the same outcome without being aware that what we bring to the table might impact somebody else, we're being naive. So when we're thinking about leadership, for me, emotional intelligence is having the bravery to bring stuff to the table, knowing that actually your responsibility is about bringing someone alongside with you, making them feel safe enough to feel that they can have a conversation with you without your emotions getting in the way. And I see it like an emotional ping pong ball. You're expecting someone to be thrown and not get anything thrown back.
Yeah.
And we talked about change management, and we've talked about restructuring quite a few times and how the impact of that is. But we also got it in, when we're talking about leading people, they don't follow the work, they follow the leader.
Absolutely. Well, people almost always leave their manager before they leave the workplace when they resign and go to other jobs. And the number of leaving dues that I've gone to where people have been so emotional about leaving their colleagues. Good emotional intelligence in a leader is creating a culture where people can be their sort of true, authentic selves. They can turn up knowing that they will do the very best that they are capable of doing, rather than being forced to be incongruent with how they are. And for me, it's about how many recruiting managers I've worked with in the past who talk about, I grow people and I recruit people for their potential. And then they micromanage those people who are supposed to be growing into a role and are supposed to be developing the potential that recruiting manager has seen. And yet their management and leadership style is very much micromanagement, criticism, my way or the highway. And that doesn't always have to be really obvious and in your face. It can be, as you say, the behaviours that you as a leader demonstrate to your team and how you make people feel.
I think, well, yeah, absolutely. I think micromanaging, unfortunately, like I said, people do absolutely leave. And I've left jobs before due to that. It's not necessarily what they say. It's always about how they make you left feeling. That you can be in a meeting, you have the intelligence, you have the experience, but the manner in which they approach it, the tone in which they speak to you, the way the undertones are, it's not the fact that I'm sensitive. It's about that I'm aware of the impact of words, impact of the tone. And when leaders who supposedly say that their staff and their team and everything, and it's so important, it's all teams, but then act and react so abruptly to feedback or curiosity, or can I just ask that about you? No, absolutely not. Like, you're not part, or you to utilize language about, that doesn't concern you.
Yeah,
I need to check this. And they have this undertone of constantly trying to put you in your place.
Yeah.
Whereas I've been in organizations and I've led teams where it feels very empowering, you're where everybody has a voice to the table and there's a lot of conversations, but everyone, you always start they're going like, what's our expectations of each other here? This is what we need to get to, but how we get there is completely up to us. You have the power to squash somebody or help someone thrive. And that's the difference between having emotional intelligence and having psychological safety, and having ants working for you, where all they're doing is looking for the roles. And they churn the work out but it's not where it could be, and you can sense it.
And they're not going to be there for you in a crisis as a leader if you're micromanaging. And, you know, a lot of people will say, well, it's not my job to be liked. And again, emotional intelligence isn't necessarily about doing everything you can to be liked by your team, particularly because sometimes you do have to deliver messages or projects or whatever that you're not fully committed to as a leader, or that you can see some shortcomings in and that sort of thing.
It's absolutely about understanding where your staff is at.
Yes.
Understanding the skill set that they have. So they can have more abilities in a skill set than you. But unless you're able to navigate those conversations to utilize it, or enable them to feel that they can bring their expertise, but you can have a conversation, and then you're building those boundaries and understanding where each other's coming from is, and or what triggers them or what's their stressors. You know, you're having to understand the human connection between your teams and what motivates them, what stresses them, how you can sit with difficult conversations. You are enabling someone to be okay with having a difficult conversation without feeling disempowered.
We talk about imposter syndrome a lot on the podcast. And actually, one of the best managers that I worked for was a guy who never made me feel like I had imposter syndrome, and led me and managed me in such a way that I knew he trusted me and believed in me, and that I was empowered to do the work that I saw fit. And in a way that I saw fit. So he was a director and I was a head of service, as it were. And initially I was kind of like, well, I need to check with you about this, and I need to do this, and I need to do that. And he was kind of like, but you know what you're doing. And it took me a long time to wrap my head around that. But that was really empowering, and I felt really confident. And then I've had other managers who have really micromanaged me and almost kind of just very slowly pulled that rug out from under me, an inch at a time, until there was nothing left in terms of my confidence, and almost like the floor had slowly been dragged from under my feet. And that was the time when I left an organisation. I didn't feel that I was trusted, and I didn't feel that I belonged because of the interactions that I had with my managers and how they made me feel.
And it's sad, isn't it? Because that's what people, like I say, stay into work for, but also what they're looking for when they go to work or when they find a new job or a career. They need that space to thrive, to feel like they actually bring a skill set. And actually, I would rather have people with less skill, but able to really know how to work as a team and bring the best out of each other. Because you can learn skill, but you can't teach character. And sometimes I've seen the wrong characters being promoted, and how that's destroyed a team's morale, sense of worth, productivity, and discourse. Whereas actually I've seen amazing leaders who have rallied the troops, know how to bring the best out, is okay with allowing people to make mistakes, mentoring it in a way that is about, you know, that's on me, owning mistakes, saying sorry, trying things. And actually that builds more respect within a team when you go, you know, this is where I need to be, and having authentic conversations. And that's also about having emotional intelligence to be able to acknowledge your limitations, but actually asking for the right support and being okay within your team to say, you're not always going to get it right. I'm not expecting you to get it right. I expect you to bring your best and ask for help, because asking for help is a skill in itself, and getting the right people to go, great, okay, so look, how do we collaborate? How can I support you, train you? Or, you know, I've maybe not explained to myself enough, because actually you can say one thing which sounds great, but you still can't control how the person perceives it.
Yeah.
You know, or hears it, which is why I always double check at the end of something is, do you understand what I'm asking of you? So what are you going to do? Because that's a really great way of feedback, of hearing, okay, that's not what I actually meant.
Yeah.
And then go, okay, so how do we learn from each other about it? And sometimes that's a great way of being able to go, you're not always going to get it right as a leader.
Yeah.
But you have to have the awareness that you are interacting with another complex human being with their own challenges who also want to do their best.
There's a couple of things in that for me. I think if we talk about the leaders who say, I grow people, you can't grow people if you criticize them. And I think also the people who are in leadership roles had their potential spotted by somebody else, and they were nurtured and grown and given feedback and opportunities to develop and improve by their leader at the time. And that's how they progressed up the career ladder. And yet so often I see people when I'm doing leadership programs almost stop dead and sort of think, I'm not demonstrating to my team their potential in the same way that my mentor or my previous manager who saw potential in me demonstrated my potential back to me. So it's almost that when they've got that level of seniority, they've lost that awareness of how valuable that nurturing and that support was for them. And then the other thing that it made me think about was, we talk about this team together, everyone achieves more. One of the things I was thinking about when you were talking about the importance of emotional intelligence in nurturing and developing a high-performing team is we seem to have put the focus on achieving more, much more than the together and everyone. And what I mean by that is that everyone is different. So that's a really important aspect of emotional intelligence. And if because everyone is different and we are aware of different drivers and circumstances and strengths and development opportunities of our team, then we come together like a well-oiled machine to achieve more. But I think over time, without realizing it, society and a lot of leadership styles and organizational cultures has had a heavy focus on just achieving and more and faster.
But then I think that's just the culture of outcomes, isn't it? That regardless of what, if you're a charity, organization, work, everything's about outcomes. You're always proving your worth. You're always proving that you can achieve the strategy or the goals, and you've always got everybody, no matter how high you are, there's always somebody else having another voice to demonstrate outcomes and doing things like that. But you have a point around there's sometimes the need for leadership about vulnerability and openness. A bit like when you're a parent, you've got to be okay to say, we're all kind of making it up. We're all having to adapt to our child as they age. We can't just expect them to just be the same 2-3-year-old. Their ideas, they become more independent. They are shaped by their world, their experiences, the way they react. And so you're always constantly having to adapt. A bit as a therapist, I have to almost change my therapy tactics to every client I've got, because actually they're uniquely made, as you say, but also, it's not one size fits all. You've got to be able to understand what works, how they're going to respond to various things. And that takes time. And often when you come to an organization that wants quick wins and quick fixes and instant outcomes, there's less time about forming your team and more about putting them into shape. I've had often go, I think you should go for that because that director would love you because you'll whip them into shape. Now that always worries me. I was like, but that's not what leadership for me is. It's, it's not about giving you the people that won't be challenging and squashing those things, but actually it's more about, well, that's not what sits authentically with me. I'd rather have a smaller team with high motivation and passion that I can shape into, like, this is the language that we use, this is the landscape that we need to get to, what's your thinking and ideas, how am I going to keep you motivated, and how can I lead you in that, and having those conversations, then going, right, this is the organisation's values and strategies, and this is what I'm expecting you to do, and let's get that done. and then end up doing a lot more performance management. But let's face it, no one likes that, and evidence-based and all these kind of things, which doesn't bring the best out of people because you're punishing someone. You're not enabling people to have a conversation. And often I've been in an organisation where I've walked in and I've gone, what on earth has been going on previously? Because it's been about me having to have a sitting with the different conversations because the leaders before me haven't done that, because either haven't got this emotional intelligence or they don't have the time. And
because they could make the time.
There's always excuses, but actually it comes down to their own skill set. And so their skill set is on a specifically and task driven rather than people orientated. And actually that's more difficult when people are promoted on experience rather than knowledge and understanding about your team. And actually a team that is happy and thriving and love to come to work will give more in the first place. They'll be more creative. They'll be able to feel they're being productive. And having somebody and yourselves being emotionally intelligent enables that to happen. So
if we look at the importance of emotional intelligence in terms of the impact on trust, so the lack of well-demonstrated emotional intelligence reduces trust and therefore reduces performance and productivity and increases sickness absence, and therefore that becomes a vicious circle where there's a perception of the need for high control.
Yeah.
Just thinking back to this line manager that I was talking about previously, I know I achieved a tremendous amount for the organisation because my line manager had such faith in me, but he demonstrated to me a commitment to me, my experience, my skills at the time, and a confidence that I could utilise that to achieve good outcomes. I've had managers who have been quick to criticise. I've not achieved good outcomes. They've then criticised me much more. One of the things I want to talk about in a different podcast, but is how there is an inverse relationship between the indicators for poor performance and the indicators of high levels of stress. The reason I mention that is that there is a correlation between how people are managed and the effectiveness of them as an individual or as a team to the quality of the outcome and of people reaching their potential.
Oh, absolutely. I think what's interesting is also about, if we think about how we grow up, we always hear the voice. We always remember the voice of what someone's either said or made you feel.
Yeah.
And we always can hold on to that. People gravitate to those who make them feel a certain way. And there's areas that I want to be on that team, not because of what they do, but about how their team feel in that environment. And we don't put enough emphasis on the ability to have a high performing, high emotional intelligence team where they're able to own their vulnerabilities, their skill set, but actually, the team that can ask for help, ask for support, ask the questions, give feedback, take feedback, can utilize each other's skills rather than being the I can and it's on me. It's about us as a team. It's about us asking for help when we need it, owning our own mistakes. But that's also a human skill. Often, when you're talking about those difficult managers who criticize, my always thinking is you have to take a step back, and it only speaks volumes about who they are and their own experiences. And isn't it sad they feel like they're repeating that cycle?
Yes.
But also that it shows you they're not ready to listen or hear. They just want results without being able to take you on that journey to understand why that's happened. And actually, for some people, it is too difficult to know that it's them. They won't sit with that. We're not very good at self-reflection of being able to go, well, maybe it's me.
Yeah.
I worked with somebody who everyone's, oh, they're great because they fight for me and all the time of it. And it was just constant. It wasn't until I worked with her for about a year and a bit, and she went, oh, I think it's actually about me. I'm too controlling. it's not a good thing that I'm always fighting or asking questions, because I'm not asking questions. And it was a massive conversation about this light bulb moment where trying to guide someone to say, look, it's not that you're doing a bad job. I'm worried about your processing of why you think that's a good thing as a leader, that you put more emphasis on not working with, but criticizing and fighting in your words, or so you're provoking constantly, because out of fear, lack of control, all these elements. But she had to kind of come to her own conclusion and awareness of that. And after that, that kind of was the start of her own emotional intelligence journey, because no one had taught that to her. But it does take a while, if that's your innate reaction, to fight against something or to criticize. If that's your mentors and that's your work life and that's your home life and that's what you've known, of course that's your core belief. So you're thinking and doing it from your core, well, I'm getting a job done, rather than questioning your own manner in which you do things. Actually, emotional intelligence is having the self-awareness of how that may come across, or where's your motivators in doing a certain task.
I had a manager who believed that her management style was going to get the best out of us. And it was very, very critical parent, I guess, if we're sort of thinking about transactional analysis. And when I left, she got me a really beautiful journal. And she said, I saw this and I thought this was absolutely perfect for you. It really, the cover of it really sort of speaks to me about you as a character. And it was so beautiful and so thoughtful. And I was completely gobsmacked, because there was a level of humanity when I was leaving that I never saw in all the time that I worked for her. And it was actually almost triggering. I still, all these years later, haven't been able to write anything in that journal.
Oh, wow.
I've kept it. And I was really tempted to write back to her and to say, but do you have any idea this is how you made me feel? And actually, having sat with it and hopefully been emotionally intelligent, I decided that that was more about me than about her, and that maybe that awareness was something that she needed to come to on her own. So would it serve either of us for me to write something potentially quite vitriolic? What's occurred to me is how people think they manage, especially if they're not emotionally intelligent, and how the recipient of that sees themselves being managed. And so I think she thought she was developing our leadership potential by actually micromanaging us and being very demanding and being very unemotional. And it had quite the opposite effect. And then you could tell she was a lovely human being. The thoughtfulness of the note that came with it was just, but it was such a contradiction.
It just reminded me, actually, to just before we kind of end, is around a story that I had. When you go into a workplace and you start sussing people out and people start telling you about other people. And it was interesting because someone said, oh, she's so different outside of work. She'll be like this in work and you will never recognise her outside of work. And I was like, well, that's really interesting. Why, why? But it was so evident in this team that everyone performed a certain way. And then when they finished, they were it was almost like they had to mirror that. We can't laugh. We can't ask, this is very rigid and strict. Like, and I think because I didn't come through that kind of medical background, I just was like, I'm just not having this. I'm going to be doing whatever. But again, it was when we went out, I had no awareness that that's how people perceived her. She just was like, well, no, logically, I find it easier to perform when I have this style.
A mask.
I feel I could do it. And then I feel like I can be my whole self when I'm outside of work without needing to be anybody. But it was interesting, that conversation going, but do you have the perception or the awareness of going, but this is how your whole team's perform, and it's what they think of you, and this is how it can come across. But often about the mask, and actually the awareness that we are all trying to navigate a way of being, both in the workplace and in our personal lives, but without the ability to own and sit with our own emotional intelligence of how we are impacted on others, how people may be feeling, thinking, processing, has the ability to make or break a team. And so I think my tips would be less about the narrative of what is being said, but take a moment about knowing who your team are, listening and being okay with listening to different voices or different opinions, and be less to react to that, or notice in your body if you're wanting to just shut that down, because that says more about you and what's your abilities. And the awareness to be aware of oneself is so important with how you're going to interact. And if you wanted to say something, then that's the definite moment of going, just be quiet. Invite people for feedback. Ask their opinion. Don't say anything. Just listen. Thank them for doing that. Take time to process it yourself. Because often people just need to know the why and if they can trust you and if you're going to hear them. And if they've had bad experiences. So I had one individual who couldn't stop interrupting all the time, to the point where it was so exhausting to be around. I mean, I interrupt a lot because I'm dyslexic, but not when in a team meeting, whenever, people are presenting. But it was in a conversation, again, because no one actually addressed it in the room, of just being curious about the need to be interrupting people and how that can come across to others. Did it come across and share a story of why that was? Because she had so many siblings and never allowed to have a voice, and everybody spoke over her and never felt that she was worthy enough. And it really touched my heart. So I was like, oh my word, I'm understanding you now.
Yeah.
But if you don't have an awareness of why somebody's doing something, you can squash them and you can make them feel such a way that actually I don't want that responsibility as a leader. I don't want no one leaving thinking I'm never allowed to be myself. But if you understand the behaviour, you might not like it, but at least it's somewhere to go, isn't it? To be curious. So always have the space to take account of your own actions. What's your motivation? So yes, you might have the boss telling you this is what you need to do, but at least have some time to go, how do you want to deliver it? How do you want your team to be left feeling? How do you want to be feeling if you want to be in that space?
Yeah.
That's more important. You can do everything else. You can do the goal setting later. But being aware that your your thought process, your way of working is not how they're going to receive it is a big way to start.
My takeaways are it can be a real competitive advantage, that people thrive when they are trusted, that we can build it as a leadership skill and consider it as and we've talked about this before, as a personal and professional competence. We can grow our emotional intelligence because it's not something that is always innate in people. It's always automatic. It's so much less tiring being able to be an authentic person than putting on a persona. Your point about somebody who is different outside of work. I haven't got the energy to be somebody different in work and outside work. I'm just too lazy to do that. But that's the bit that makes the connection that then helps build a high-performing team.
I'd love to hear people's experiences of what their experiences of good leadership looks like. I think my call to action for you, amazing listeners, is to share, get in touch with us, share your stories, so we can kind of do a almost bring and share episode where we share people's stories, funny, sorrowful, whatever, comical stories about leadership, and so as connect through that storytelling. So until next time.
Brilliant.
Thanks for joining us today on Heels in the Hierarchy with SJ
and Pegsy. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please spread the word and share it with your work bestie, your mentor, or anyone with their heels in the hierarchy.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and if you could spare a moment to leave us a review, it helps our other ambitious women find our community.
Find us on LinkedIn and Instagram for more content and behind-the-scenes glimpses.
Until next time, keep your heels high and your standards higher.